The first trend I want to sort of talk about is the notion of branding itself. If you look at branding, companies are realizing that branding is becoming more and more critical. And for a lot of US firms, I think it's sort of very visible and it's sort of an obvious thing to do is to build a brand. But this is changing for a lot of international firms. And if you look at what's happened in the last 10 to 12 years, Samsung, which is a relatively an unknown sort of brand, has realized that it can survive as an OEM producer for other people. Right, so it's realized that it sort of needs to build its own sort of brand, and it's systematically sort of built its brand. If you look at most recent ratings in Interbrand and Business Week, Samsung has overtaken Sony as a stronger brand in the marketplace. So brands are not just for consumer packaged goods. If we take 4 of the top 5 brands that exist in the Interbrand rating, 4 of the top 5 are actually business-to-business brands or technology-type products. So this notion of brands becoming an important part of a firm's investment, an important part of a firm's strategy, is here to stay. And you're going to see more and more organizations worldwide sort of do this phenomenon. In fact, some would argue that a key asset of a firm, they could lose their bricks, they could lose their mortar, they could lose other things, but the brand is something that they can't afford to lose. The second trend that I want to talk about is actually to talk about this notion of what I call companies had one stakeholder. As a marketer, we would advise people to focus on the consumer as the key sort of stakeholder. I think that focus on a single sort of stakeholder opens up blind spots for companies. Focusing on one stakeholder ignores other non-commercial stakeholders that sort of exist, and they're becoming more and more important, especially in this new world of social media becoming more important. These non-stakeholders may be opinion leaders, could be sort of, it could be the non-purchasers who have strong opinions about companies. They start to come into play. Recent example is the Royal Caribbean. Royal Caribbean sort of continued to run its cruises even during the Haiti earthquake. And their argument was that they're doing a good thing because they provide employment opportunities for people in these sort of islands. But if you look at what's happening with the earthquake and the television images of what was happening, and simultaneously look at a cruise line, they don't really sort of gel together. And these two factors sort of start to hurt a firm. So the idea that a firm is not just responsible for the consumer, but also a wide set of external constituents becomes very critical. They got to design their marketing strategy being cognizant of not just the consumer, but also these external stakeholders, multiple stakeholders. I think sort of is a second major sort of trend that's sort of happening. The third sort of trend, which is sort of tied together with this idea, is the notion, which is actually tied back to that precision idea that I'm going to leverage later, is this notion of managing for affordability. Companies need to start designing products with affordability in mind. And if you look at affordability in mind, you start working backwards. You've got to come back and understand what can people afford, what are people willing to pay. And that should be a factor. And you should do everything that you can to improve the affordability and the willingness to pay. At the same time, given the affordability that people have or the willingness to pay, you got to work backwards and design products. Lots of great examples. The Tata Nano is a great example of a product where they looked at affordability and said, what is affordability in the market? And they realized the affordability for people to buy a roof over their two-wheeler scooter is about $2,500. Now can we work backwards and start to design an offering that can reach the target? GE's eventually sort of learned that in selling X-ray machines in many of these developing markets as well. And what they realized is the fact that having over-engineered, having product can do a lot of things which cost perhaps $100,000 is not what the market can sort of bear. And so they realized that we need to design products at the $10,000, $15,000 range. And so they've gone back and re-engineered the products to reach the target market. And what's very interesting is they're finding that there's a market for those products back in the Western countries as well. And there are markets within the Western countries, and there are pockets of these markets or segments of these markets where these products can have an opportunity. So you design a product for one market, but it blows back into another market. So the trend is not always from the west to the east. There are lots of innovations that are starting at the east that are moving back towards the west as well.